So, good evening and welcome. This is the meeting of the Special Education Advisory Committee of the Halton District School Board for Tuesday, April the 6th, 2021. Given the need to practice social distancing due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we're holding this meeting remotely through a video conference. This meeting is being recorded. In accordance with Ontario Regulation 463/97 and the new guidelines effective February the 1st, 2021, any meeting of the Board of Trustees and/or committee meetings which are open to the public must be live streamed and be able to take questions from the public. The purpose is to foster two-way participation during the meetings. To comply with this, SEAC will be using a Google form, which is attached to each agenda distributed in advance of the meetings and posted on the HDSB SEAC website. Questions can also be emailed to goodrowl@hdsb.ca. Questions posed during live stream meetings of SEAC may be answered during the meeting, particularly those related to agenda items, or at the following meeting at the discretion of the chair. For efficiency, multiple questions received that are similar in nature may be grouped together at the discretion of the chair and/or vice chair. Questions will not be attributed. Notation will be made that multiple people ask the same question. Any questions that contain language that is hateful or discriminatory will not be considered. So, Lucille, our vice chair, could you please start with a roll call to determine who is present?
Yes, I'm going to start with the association reps. ABC, Yellen.
Yes, I'm here.
Jen.
I'm here as well.
Autism Ontario, Lisa.
Sorry to interrupt, Lucille, but Lisa doesn't have the link to the meeting, and I'm wondering if Lorna could send that to her.
Yeah, I just said.
Okay, super, thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Easter Seals, Melissa Dockery. Sarah Lansley. Halton Down Association, Sophia Siddiqui. Learning Disabilities, Alison.
I just admitted Sophia.
Okay. And Diane Vanden Bosch.
I saw her a few moments ago.
I also thought I saw her.
Yeah, she's up here.
I'm here. I was having trouble getting my mic back on.
Okay.
Good evening, all.
Good evening. Voice, Judy Shields. Okay. Trustees, Tracy.
Hello, everyone.
Heather.
Good evening, everyone.
Joanna.
Good evening, everyone.
Margot.
Shoot, I am here.
Margot.
Oh, my.
Members at large, myself.
I am. There. Is it working?
I'm here.
Awesome.
James.
Present. And Margot, there'll be no that language, okay?
And Diane Miller.
Here, present.
And Colette.
Good evening.
Good evening. And is there anybody that I've not noticed or called out?
So I believe that Lorna is going to log the staff that are in attendance as well. So that's great.
Okay.
And my apologies. Sorry, I walked in a bit late, but I'm here.
That's great. Thank you, Sophia.
Thanks.
Okay, we will first of all begin by honouring the land, and today Lucille will read the acknowledgement.
Halton, as we know it today, is rich in history and modern traditions of many First Nations and the Métis. From the Atawandaron, the Haudenosaunee, and the Métis, these lands surrounding the Great Lakes are steeped in Indigenous history. As we gather today on these treaty lands, we have the responsibility to honor and respect the four directions: land, water, plants, animals, and the ancestors that walked before us, and all the wonderful elements of creation that exist. We would like to acknowledge and thank the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation for sharing their traditional territory with us. Thank you.
Thank you. So first of all, we need to approve the agenda for tonight's meeting. Are there any modifications or amendments that need to be made to the agenda? And if so, could you indicate your wish to speak in the chat box or raise your hand? No, I'm not seeing any modifications to the agenda. So will somebody motion to approve?
I would like to make a motion. James Baldwin.
Great, James.
Yellen, would you like to second?
Who was that? Sorry, Lucille?
I said I asked Yellen if she'd like to second the motion to approve the agenda.
I can second it.
Great. Is anybody who does not want to accept the agenda as it is? If you please raise your hand or indicate in the chat box. Anyone who wishes to not accept the agenda? None being seen, the agenda is unanimously approved. So next will be the approval of our March the 2nd meeting minutes. Are there any errors or omissions? Again, if you wish to highlight something, please do so in the chat box. So any errors or omissions at this stage? No? Okay.
Jen, would you like to move a motion to approve the minutes?
Sure. I will move a motion to approve minutes. Yes.
Margot, would you second?
Yes, I will second.
And then does anybody is anybody in opposition to the minutes as recorded? If you would like to make yourself known, anybody in opposition? None being seen, the minutes are approved unanimously. So we're going to begin with our action items, and we have quite a few of them tonight. So item 2.1, tonight we welcome instructional program leaders Angela Sova, Rob Garcia, Ryan Candlish, to provide us with a presentation on the Community Pathways Program Guide and Community Skills Co-op Program. They will be seeking our feedback on their presentations later to allow them to move forward with this programming. So welcome.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We're very happy to be here to share our work with you, to receive some feedback. I'm going to start the presentation and we'll be splitting it up a little bit. So we're going to be talking a little bit about a guide that we've created to CPP. We feel like it's going to be a valuable resource for staff members and parents in the community. So moving on, Angela, to the next slide. I'm going to start with a little bit of a history for those of you who are not familiar with CPP. So historically, it was actually two distinct programs referred to Life Skills and Center. When I started in the board in 2004, we had 4 regional sites. It's a regional program. We've expanded to Georgetown in 2010. And then subsequent to that expansion, MMR opened a program as well. We began using the Carolina curriculum when I first started in 2004, and then we adopted a functional assessment curriculum. Those are our 2 alternative curriculum documents. We developed our employable skills certificate program for students in their last years of community pathways. I had an opportunity to present on Project Search, which started 2 years ago. And then, of course, the development of the CSC, which Angela will touch on a little bit later. So in terms of the structure of community pathways, we have 2 phases. The first phase is years 1 through 4. During that time, we are building a strong foundation in terms of functional academics and develop a community readiness profile. So we complete a baseline assessment using our curriculum documents for our students. We identify where gaps are in terms of learning and programming. The other thing that we do during those first 4 years is that we really identify in terms of a skill set and also an interest. In the last 3 years of school, we are really hyper-focused on preparing students to enter the community through our co-op, community skills co-op or employable skills certificate. And then students enter those programs in their last 3 years, again, building a foundation in terms of the skills that will allow them to move forward as young adults in the community. We do have a flow chart that you will be able to have a quick little look at, which sort of outlines what I just explained. In the flow chart, you will see our 4 program areas. We have students who require complete care. We have students who require communication focus. Then we have our community skills co-op pathway students and our employable skills certificate students. So just a visual representation of brief outline. And I believe Ryan is going to take it from here.
Thanks, Rob. Thank you very much for having us here today. So I'm going to start to touch on the actual guide that we have created. So as it was mentioned, it was primarily developed by the 3 of us, instructional program leaders with special education services, but certainly in conjunction with a lot of other people in the board as well. We've reached out and sort of tapped a lot of shoulders to get as much input as possible. And really the goal of this guide is to create consistency across the program areas that Rob touched on there. It's a very challenging task, and we really think that this is going to be a big step in the right direction. So what it is, it's, I believe you guys all have access to the document now, but it's a digital document that has all of that housed information that we really think is going to help move CPP forward. Images, examples, and things that are really going to help our teachers program effectively. And it will be up on my HDSB as a great resource. So we're just going to dive into the actual guide a little bit. I'm going to do just kind of an overview. This is our table of contents page. So I'm just going to kind of touch quickly on each one of these, just to let what our reasoning behind it is. And then obviously, if you want to dive into it further, you're certainly welcome to. So it does start with that overview, kind of similar to what Rob touched on. So for those who need that to have a good understanding of what the program is as a whole, that's how we start the guide. We go on to touch on administrative look-fors. Those are just kind of, sometimes we do have new administrators that come into a school who may have not supported a CPP program before. So this just helps understand the learner profile and what to expect in those environments. On to number 3, we have outlined our learning expectations, course outlines, and alternative curriculum. I'm going to dive later into the course outlines a little further because that's kind of the meat of what we've created and what we'd like to share with you guys today. On number 4, we move on to how we assess in CPP. It certainly does look quite a bit different than what would we do in a mainstream class. So that gives a good outline as to some good best practices and how to effectively assess our community pathways program students. Number 5, we moved on to effective IEP writing and how we think, how we can move forward in creating consistency across the board with our IEPs. Again, the IEPs that the community pathways program students have will look quite a bit different than a typical IEP with a lot more in depth, and that's where all of our programming is really housed. On to number 6, we touch on what a good transition into CPP might look like. Could be transitions from grade 8 to grade 9 or out of board, but often they do require quite a bit more detailed information to have an effective transition, and it's an important part for our students to get started on the right foot when they enter into our program. So a few guides there, guiding principles, timelines, and how to do that effectively. On to number 7, this is kind of what Rob was talking about earlier, but we kind of expand it and go into a little bit more detail. Again, those first 4 years and those course outlines that I touched on earlier, what that looks like, all of the outlines that we created to really foster that consistency and that depth and that quality programming for our students. And then the complete care program we have for our first 4 years when our students are really trying to get those foundational skills developed. And then number 8, we move on to the final 3 years and kind of what we envision that looking like for our students. Rob, Angela, and I all have a few years of experience in trying to create an effective last 3 years. And for lots of these students, this is crucial time. So really preparing them for whatever that's going to look after school, whether that be competitive employment or moving into the community. We really want to get them prepared for doing that as best we can. Number 9, all of our Community Pathways programs will have an outdoor learning space. They almost all do now. We are working on that. This is great programming for our students to get out and have sensory experiences, outdoor learning, just getting them up and moving. It's good for all students, but especially for our Community Pathways program students. And this just outlines kind of what our goal is with that. And then finally, a good resource bank for our teachers. As it is, a unique teaching environment, and sometimes teachers may not have the depth of experience with Community Pathways program students and alternative curriculum. We wanted to create a good a bank of resources for them to easily access. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. As I said, obviously there's lots more to it in there, and feel free to dive into it as much as you'd like. So the key piece that I did want to touch on are those course outlines that we've created. Over the past 2+ years, the 3 of us had connected with the Community Pathway Program department heads and had several long meetings and getting together and hashing it out and what these outlines should look like. And so really the basis of it is there are 16 non-credit courses that are provided by the ministry for us to use. But the challenge is, when compared to, a regular stream class, when you have the Ontario curriculum, there's no curriculum provided with that. It's literally just the name of a course. So we had to go in and really dive in, and using the AFAC in Carolina, create the best course outlines for our teachers to access, to have that consistency and depth in programming. So we can if you want to open it up quickly there, Angela, I can kind of show you what it looks like. So those are the 16 courses that we do have to offer, and we do offer. As Reb talked about, we have the 4 program areas that we're focusing on. So the complete care program, that first row there, is kind of a complete package when we deliver that programming to our students. They have a lot of sensory needs that are typically met, and programming throughout the day as a class as a whole. So the programming looks a little bit different. We do have a couple of guidelines for that within the document that kind of drives that programming. And then for our communication program area, and then our CSC and our ESC, that's where we really created those in-depth course outlines. So Angela, if you want to maybe open one up, and we can just have a quick look. So that's the Creative Arts for Enjoyment and Expression course. So what we did, the first thing we did was kind of standardize it. They all look the same. They crisp and clean, easy to read. And as you can see, for our coding purposes, we just had, so D signifies that that's going to be an ESC course. So this is for our employability skills certificate bound students. So for them, so if we go in and each one will have that course description. This is the goal of the course. These are the skills we're trying to develop that will, certainly hopefully help them prepare for whatever path they're going to be taking. Where we get that from, again, we always have to have that, the AFAC and the Carolina, and then we go, the course expectations are those specific expectations that we get from the AFAC or the Carolina curriculum. And we've gone through years of experience of teachers using these curriculums and talking with teachers and us and the program leads, kind of divvied out and highlighted the course expectations that match up with the program area and with the specific course. So a teacher who might come in and may have never taught in a community pathways program is able to get a course outline, see kind of what some of the goals could be, and then obviously they go in and do their assessment of their students, and that's how they essentially create the programming for them. With this guide to hopefully create that consistency across the board. That's really what we were aiming for. Thanks, Angela. So this just kind of sums up what I was talking about. Not really anything new here, but really, in a nutshell, really trying to get that consistency across the board, so that we're able to effectively, serve our students with developmental disabilities. In our experience, when we have new teachers and new staff that come in, there's a steep learning curve. So we're trying to help those new teachers out so they can jump right in and really give that effective programming. And then for the experienced teachers, we're really trying to lean on them and enhance their skills so that we can deliver the best program possible for our CPP students and prepare them for life after high school. As it says there, throughout the guide, there's lots of exemplars, direction and guidance, and resources for them to go and easily access, because that was, in talking with our staff, that was a big need for them. And I think that's it for me. Oh, Angela?
So we just had a quick question there. Let me just find the chat. Yes. So this is from Sophia Siddiqui. Will there be staff training on these new guidelines? That's a great question. And I can on that first, and then if anybody else wants to jump in. But certainly, obviously it has been a little more challenging with regards to that type of getting together and having some of those times when we can have those training sessions. But absolutely there will be. And really, lots of the stuff that we are providing for our teachers isn't really new. It's just we've kind of taken it from a variety of places and kind of put it into a nice, easily accessible package. Certainly for some of our newer teachers, this information will be new. Our teachers are already using these course outlines and accessing these types of materials. We're just really trying to put it together so they can easily access it. The main thing that will be new to them is the community skills co-op program that Angela's going to touch on. I don't know if anybody else wants to add to that.
Sorry, thank you so much, Ryan, for answering. Just a quick, I think CPP is a tired program, not just in our board, like across the board, all boards. So I'm so happy. Just want to say with the work you guys are doing, this looks great. It's so refreshing, but I think it's going to be impactful when the rollout happens effectively. So all staff kind of hear about it, because everyone's busy, right? Teachers are busy too. And so I don't know if they'll take the time to on their own go through the guideline and all the great things you guys have. So just a suggestion, maybe some sort of, whether even if it's online, virtual training or workshops or something, I think would be cool.
Thank you, Sophia. We are really looking at what that is going to look like for the fall. And as we roll it out, our intent is to support schools both in person and also virtually. Hopefully we'll get back to in-person support soon. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And Margot, you have a hand up?
I do. I'm kind of not sure if I want to ask it now or later, but I will ask it now just because my hand was up. So you speak about the 60 non-credit courses that are involved with CPP. What I'm wondering is, are students in CPP, if wanting to, able to get 4 credit courses?
Yeah, I can jump in there. So We have different placement options. So students who are go through the IPRC process into the Community Pathways program could be the placement could be fully self-contained. Those students are limited to the alternative courses through the ministry, which all have a K in front of them. But sometimes students can have a placement option of partially integrated. And in that case, students are able to take courses for credit. We do look for ways of integrating students into courses for experience, sometimes not for credit. And so oftentimes we will look at reverse integration opportunities so that they can experience different level of programming, and then of course participate with the neurotypical student body.
So can I follow up, Rob? So, because I know you're at Nelson with this, and so with that then, so with the CP program area, it's at the front of the school. So if there are students in there who say, hey, I want to take an art course, or I want to take a computer course, or I want to take auto tech, are they able to select a course and go into the other part of the school to work with the other students in the school?
They are if they have a placement of partial integration. Oftentimes we do work with teachers to provide students an experience. Say, for example, we had a student that had a special interest in art and it made sense, then we can go ahead and do that. But in terms of getting a credit, the student would have to have a placement of partial integration.
Okay, and Yalin had a question. Where will the CPP program be hosted? Is that the 6 sites that you mentioned at the beginning? Okay, and so that will continue at those 6 sites.
Yep. Yes.
Okay, great. And James, you had a hand up.
Yeah, I'm just curious if you have placements both like out in the community, out in schools, or out in sheltered environments, that kind of thing. What kind of co-op skills placements do you have?
I think that's going to be the next bit of the presentation.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we'll let Angela, if it's you speaking now, Angela, we'll let Angela take us into the next area, unless there are any other questions at this stage. Nope. Okay, take it away, Angela. Thank you.
Okay, nice to see you all. Thank you for having us here. The second half of this presentation is really around the Community Skills Co-op. This is a newly developed non-credit bearing program that was written by 4 CPP teachers and myself, who spent the better part of last year reviewing best practices, pooling our collective knowledge, and vision casting to come up with a new model of developing skills within our CPP. In terms of how it came about, in 2019, Project Search was introduced, which Rob talked about. It came to our school board, and as the Communication Center assistant running the CPP at Blakelock, I was privileged enough to help support its implementation. I fell in love with the delivery model and the efficacy of the program, but really only 12 to 15 students can benefit from that program year over year. In conversations with my peers at other CPP sites, it was clear that there was inconsistency and maybe a lack of resources for the current, something we called at the time the Community Skills Certificate. And I saw an opportunity to develop something to bridge those gaps. So also as a teacher of that CPP co-op, the difficulty of trying to teach students with special needs job-related skills on the job and in the community is a real challenge. Because out on co-op, really the focus needs to be on the business, the client, and the quality of the work, rather than the learning of our students, although they can take place at the same time. It can be challenging to teach a full range of skills and for the EA staff working in that nuanced environment to navigate and mitigate those relationships. So recognizing those challenges, together we crafted a new model of delivery for the co-op experience that takes into account the need for CPP students to practice in authentic environments, workplace skills before going out onto job sites. So let's take a look at where it fits in the context of CPP. So students in CPP, again, are here for a total of 7 years, but in the final 3 years of CPP, there's a shift in programming direction to support each individual student's post-secondary pathway. So this can happen in a number of ways, depending on the needs of the individual. The first way is that student remains in the regular classroom with individualized programming. That may be students with complete care-oriented needs or communication needs and low adaptive functioning. And this is all determined kind of at the annual review every year. The second place is in a co-op type setting, and that's where our CSC fits in. The third way is through the Employability Skills Certificate Program, where students are trained and earn certificates that will aid their employability. These are students that have the adaptive skills to go directly into a community co-op, and they'll be able to earn certifications such as WMIS or Safe Food Handling, a number of other certificates that kind of aid them with gainful employment post-graduation. And the last place that students spend that final 3 years is in Project Search. So the Community Skills Co-op fits into the second area, and it's designed to support students who are not ready for a traditional co-op or a certificate program for a variety of reasons. These may include literacy or numeracy skills or adaptive functioning skills. However, through the CSC, more of our students with a wider range of skills will have opportunities to access co-op type programming. So what's the concept? The concept is that there's a definitive difference in participation-based praise in schools to the quality and quantity mindset necessary for the work environment. So in our life skills classes, we provide kitchens and laundry machines to teach those skills explicitly and provide lots of practice for them to do that. But up until now, we haven't had the same vehicle to replicate the work environment and help our students with special needs shift from the school environment to that work environment in the same way. So this program provides that experiential environment and learning necessary to help students orient themselves for a workplace. The idea of the CSC is to capitalize on the resources within the school to help students gain those skills before they move off-site, to explicitly teach and practice those skills in the safe and comfortable environment of the school. So those skills that we're working on are things like personal readiness for work, digital skills, an awareness of health and safety and well-being, and also navigating the community. The reason we focused on those skills is they may not have been taught or solidified in the first 4 years. And this program gives students additional opportunity to develop them in a workplace type environment without the pressure of actually being on the job. So essentially, each CPP site will have choice of the in-house training rotations that they set up kind of as a mock working environment within their facility to teach functional work skills. So the teacher and the educational assistant essentially become the student's job coach and their boss as they learn practically what it feels like to work. This model allows students to train for work and be coached through scenarios and settings to ensure they have the skills to function in the community. So what's inside the guide? I hope you have had a chance to browse through the CSC that was attached to the agenda. But in essence, there are 4 components to the program. The first one is an administrator's guide. We had one of those in the guide to CPP as well. And really it helps support schools with implementation and best practices. It looks at considerations, who belongs in a CSC, what the IEP should look like, all those sorts of things that administrators would need. The second section is a startup guide with respect to resources and funding and creative solutions for both. And then the third section is a legacy project, which is a visual resume that is created by students over the course of their time in CSC. And then the last section is really the meat of the program, the programming elements. And this includes course outlines, and those are corresponding to the ones you saw in the guide to CPP. The general skills development checklist, and the in-house training rotations with explicit teacher tools. And the final section is that out to work plan that supports staff as they consider each semester, each year, how and when to release students into a more traditional co-op setting into those environments. So again, I hope you've had a chance to take a look, but this is a snapshot of one of our sections there. So you have a draft copy, but on this slide, this is from the car detailing and maintenance training rotation. On the chart, you'll note that the jobs and tasks the students will be involved in, as well as some sample IEP expectations that correspond to the teaching components, as well as the resources needed to implement the rotation. So the document is really intended to be user-friendly for teachers to support actualizing it with consistency. So the goal of the program is to support a wider range of students with diverse needs being included into a workplace training and to explicitly teach and practice skills before entering the community for work. So we have special education specialists in each of our CPP sites that can be working with students in a mock environment to enhance their chance at success and that skill development that we aren't currently capitalizing on. It's my belief that by providing schools with a program guide, there'll be greater consistency across the board with respect to programming, but more importantly to the student experience in our Community Pathways program. So the hope is that after you've taken a look at it tonight and you've given us some valuable feedback, that we can put this from draft into official, that we would take the time. You asked about supporting schools with implementation. Absolutely. The goal is to provide the document, training, and support throughout the next school year with the full implementation the following year in the fall of 2022. So the hope is that we would have those networking and training sessions, that we would provide professional development and support schools implementing this newer program. So with that, we would like to open up the conversation to additional Q&A. There were a few targeted questions posted on the agenda, and Ryan, Rob, and I will field any additional questions and input you may have for us. And we just want to say thank you for your attention to our presentation this evening.
Well, thank you so much for what was a very interesting and informative presentation. It's wonderful to see programs expand. We heard about Project Search and all loved that program, as obvious that you do too, and it's great to see that there's some other opportunities for it. One question I did have is, what kind of community partners do you anticipate will come on board to provide the work experiences for the students in this pathway?
So the CSC is intended that we could run in our own facilities with our own resources, but providing opportunities that they would go into a work environment authentic to their community. So the partners in Oakville might be different from Milton, might be different from Georgetown. And that's why there's a selection of in-house training rotations that would be authentic to the school and their community based on the community partners that they have. So we're training the students in-house with those skills and then releasing them naturally to their community with a like job. Does that make sense?
Yep, no, that's great. Does Sophia, you had a question?
Hi guys. So first of all, thank you so much. Honestly, this sounds amazing. It's something that we've needed for a long time. And I presented, a couple of months ago, and one of my biggest concerns, and all the families I represent, families will say this again and again, is that we need to raise the bar for our kids, and we need to change their perception for their peers, right? So traditionally, old school, back in the day, and sadly it still happens now, is our kids clean the cafeterias, right? And so their peers see them as cleaners. And that's all we've kind of boxed them into this role. And so with technology, I've had, parents, high school parents call me and say, my teacher in the CPP class doesn't teach my kid how to send me an email or how to text. And I've had parents call me really frustrated that why don't they teach them the skills that they need in the real world? We need to wake up. We're not in the 80s anymore. We need to get our kids, give them employability, futuristic skills. So honestly, I can't wait to share this with our families. They're going to be very excited. But again, as a teacher and administrator in a public funded school board, I know that the systemic barrier sometimes is that we have staff that have been teaching in these programs for 20 years, and they're stuck in that old school way of thinking in their mind. They don't have growth mindset. As much as I'd like to give everybody the benefit of doubt, they're stuck and they see our kids as this is all they can do. Here's the bar. So that's why I'm a big advocate of education, training, all that. It sounds like you guys are obviously on board and you understand what our kids can do now and you're raising the bar. But I really hope we push that out to especially the teachers, and looking at even staffing. right? So maybe teachers that have been teaching CPP for 20 plus years, we need to freshen things up maybe. Like, I don't know how that would work. I don't know, how administratively you could do that. But if you've all taught in the program, so you get what I'm saying is that some staff need like a wake up, freshen up, dust off the old cloth, right? So I'm excited. I'm very hopeful and excited. So thank you. And I guess my next question would be similar to what Allison was saying, is that I know the community support would be there if we reach out to the community. People would want to take part. People would want to help out. But I do hope that we're going to bring in some technology training for the kids, right? So we're not doing the cafeteria thing. That's like my pet peeve. I'm sure there's some value in that, but we just need to raise the bar.
Yeah, Sophia, we did really include digital skills as one of our general skills, that students need to be exposed to a wide variety of digital tools. And we need to explicitly teach what that looks like in the work environment. So that is a part of the CSC. Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you for the work you guys are doing. Thumbs up.
Colette, you have a hand up.
Thanks, and thanks to the team for a great presentation. And I echo what Sophia says around the importance of supporting staff in their growth and the intensive training that lies ahead of us. And we're certainly very invested in doing that work with our staff in our sites. I did promise on behalf of Candace Keene, she's the representative from Community Living, who had to send her regrets this evening, that I was talking to her about this work, and in listening to the work that she does in her organization, there's a real opportunity for us to partner with the community living agencies in each of our region. And I know she's going to be watching this presentation after the fact, and I did promise that I would connect you to her following this presentation, so you can start to build those connections.
Great.
Thank you, Colette. We appreciate it.
Great. I think Margot was next.
I think James was ahead of me, if James has a question.
James, do you have a question?
If I do, that's a surprise to me. I don't think I.
Okay, your hand is still up from before. Okay, so Margot, it's your turn.
Okay, so I'm kind of building off what Sophia was saying in the idea of raising expectation. It comes back to my question. I really hope that we continue to explore those opportunities for the students in the CPP program to have opportunities to work with the other children in the class and the other school. I even look at, so Ryan, I think it was you, Ryan, or maybe it was Angela, the auto mechanic work stuff that you had there. So my son is in auto mechanics, and a lot of that stuff was things that he did in a regular classroom. So I think that is something, again, as Sophia said, it's those attitudinal barriers that are the biggest ones for these kids to come up against, and any opportunities that we have to try to forge those relationships and forge those similar pathways in the mainstream as well as the self-contained classroom, I think is a great opportunity that I hope we don't miss.
Margot, I think that's a great point. If I can just kind of respond to that. And I think part of our goal is to get this in administrators' hands, get this in everybody's hands who we can, so everybody has an idea of what we're trying to do and try to change some of those mindsets. I know that when I was at White Oaks, I would reach out to as many of the teachers I could personally, and try to create that relationship and let them know that, we may have some students that might be coming your way, and make sure that just those little opportunities to get to know other teachers in the school and to really make them feel part of the school. And they are really, to be honest with you, they're a huge part of our schools. They're not just siloed off into the, off into the corner, but we do have a lot of work to do. And I hope this is a good step in that direction. So.
Yeah, awesome. I hope so too. So again, thank you for all the work that the three of you have done. And again, I look forward to hearing the future.
Yarlin, you have a question.
Hi, yes, and I want to congratulate the great work that the team did, and it's exciting. And because my work is in post-secondary education, and so just wondering, is there a consideration for those children, students in a CPP program, also to have a pathway? So after they have all those skills and to be, considered for the, future, maybe continuing training and at the colleges and, continue their workplace training.
So I can speak to that a little bit. So we've worked with school programs to make sure that parents understand what programs are offered at some of our community colleges in terms of continuing education. From our perspective, we really feel a sense of sort of urgency to get students working competitively, if possible, in the community. So our programs are really designed to develop the readiness skills and the partnerships in the community to make sure that students land in a place where they feel fulfilled and are contributing. But we make sure that parents do understand that should they want to continue their education, that they have all the information for our community colleges that offer programming for our students.
Yeah, so I just want to put it out there because community colleges also have a lot of resources with, workplace training, and because that is what their focus are. And we do support students with, quite diverse abilities. And so with placement and all the accommodation that the college is able to offer, I think, for some students, perhaps coming out of the CPP program, to continue and their workplace training. And so not just, to be concentrated in those areas that from the courses that they took, in the CPP program, but they can explore other areas such as arts, theater, and different programs that maybe, cater to their ability.
Great. Okay. I think it was Tracy. Next, you have a hand up.
Hello, everyone. My question is with respect to the learning spaces that are described early in the guide and the different resources and cues and so on that are envisioned under best practices. I wonder, is that a place where we are right now? Like, are you resourced well enough to make those things happen across all of the different sites? Or what does that look like right now?
Tracy, go ahead, Rob.
I would say that we are very close to that. I think when schools find that there's gaps in terms of the learning environment, that we're very quick to make sure that those gaps are closed. Sean, Collette, and formerly Mark have been very supportive in that venture. So I think that's the ideal. We're continuing to do some work around physical spaces in general to make sure that we feel like we have sort of the ideal learning environment for our students. But I would say that across the board, we are very close to that standard.
That's awesome to hear, because I know going into this budget cycle, which we'll be looking at with SEAC and at the board, that resources likely won't be plentiful. So, but this is a critical area. So thanks for that explanation.
Heather, you had a hand up.
Yes, thank you. I'm very excited about this program. This is, this is what we've been needing for a long time. Fresh, new, and moving forward. It's awesome. And I see how it's tying in and translating for the future. But my question is, what are we doing to mesh it with the elementary so that it flows from, early on right through? That's my question.
So I'll speak to it, and if Angela or Ryan want to jump in. So because we use a functional assessment curriculum in our life skills program in elementary, there is a natural progression into our secondary course outlines. When students transition into community pathways through the transition process and baseline assessments, IEP assessments, alternative report cards, staff at the high school level understand where their students are. So there's a continuation in that sense. It's a bit more free-flowing at the elementary level, but they are really starting the foundation. So if you look at it as a house, they're pouring that foundation, and then we continue based on information that we get in community pathways around the continuation of the development of those skills. I think the consistency across the system in terms of our curriculum documents, because they're quite extensive, allows for that natural progression into high school and the continuation. So there is a cohesiveness amongst the two programs.
Okay, great. So I just wanted to turn it back to you. You had some questions that you wanted us to answer. I just wanted to see how we'd done on any of them, or whether we've been completely off track. In terms of, I know you obviously want to move forward with this in your next stage. So if there's any specific information that you would like as feedback, perhaps we could go back to that slide.
Yeah, I think just the major question that we're looking for is around whether or not you believe the document would be helpful for families, specifically the guide to CPP, and what that would look like if maybe a condensed version would be helpful for the community and families. That's the one question we haven't got to.
Okay. Anybody want to start? I mean, personally, when I looked at it, it was very clear, easy to understand, and gave good overview of what the program was all about and what the outcomes were likely to be. So I think it's very beneficial. In terms of a condensed program, obviously, there's a lot of information there in the program that you've got, which would not necessarily be for parents and even students, but so I'm sure that there's areas that you can cleave out, but keeping in mind, I think the whole concept is what is the vision of the program, and why is this so important, and therefore that the parents see that this is a longer, a part of a longer pathway. Tracy.
Sorry. It's an active place around here. I was just wondering if one of the potential target audiences is families, whether there's a specific section or tie-in for their role, like how do they interface or interplay with the guide and all of the good things that the guide is saying happens with their students.
That's a great comment, to add something in the way of partnering with families. You mean to add something around their role and maybe what they can do to support their child learning those skills along the way. I like that.
James, you have a question.
Yeah. I like the outline of the program. I've taught cooperative education to deaf students for 15, 16 years now. And I think it's really, really nice, comprehensive look. But I think if you're going to reach your parents, I think it would be better to give them a more Reader's Digest version, a little shorter, more condensed, something maybe with a timeline, something with graphics. But the way that you've organized the program and having them start early is really commendable, and I think is going to do you well, because what I've found my biggest struggle with is having students arrive in grade 12 who just don't have the skills that you guys are talking about, the basic skills, and they haven't had that one-to-one intervention and streaming with that goal to get them work ready. And that's why I think that this program has a good chance of being successful.
Great.
And if it's going to be something to distribute to parents, I think a card stock, something like a pamphlet would be more effective. Just because my experience has been even with potential employers, the more you load down them with a lot of text and a lot of deep explanation, the more they tend to phase out. So hook them with good graphics, use timelines and condense your information, and I think it'll be much more have much more of an impact, and you'll get more people on board. That's my personal opinion.
Great, thank you, James. Sarah.
Hi, yeah, I agree. Sorry, in terms of having sort of a busy place here too. I agree with having sort of that snapshot thing, right, to sort of grab people's attention. But just being someone who myself likes to look deeper and sort of look at the background, I think also having the full guide available for those who do want more information, that sort of thing, just that transparency of information and availability. But that's just my opinion as well. But yeah, I think something short and sweet to sort of provide an outline, and then have the full information available.
Great. Sophia.
So just wondering at this point, how much can we share with our families? Are we able to share, how much can we share?
So I would say that it's really in draft format right now. It's not kind of ready to go out, and we would love the opportunity to share with staff. But definitely you have it in your hands, and it's coming. Like we said earlier, the guide to CPP, really there's not much new that's going to shock anyone. It's just put all together succinctly to talk around best practices. And so that is, kind of more ready to go than the CSC. I think the CSC is a newer component that we still have a lot of work to do with respect to training up staff and implementing that. So
okay,
that would be my.
Perfect. Thank you.
Margot, was that you? Hand up or no?
Just itching.
Oh, okay. Well, I'd just like to thank you all for presenting to us. It's, again, another wonderful initiative that's going on in the middle of pandemic, taking the opportunity to learn from what works, what doesn't work. I think that's one of the wonderful things we've been seeing at the board over the last year. So if anybody has any last questions. No. Otherwise, we'd like to thank you for joining us here this evening and to wish you all the best with the program.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks very much.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you. Take care.
Bye.
Okay, well, after that wonderful presentation, we're now on to our next action item, which is a presentation by Roxana Nagoy, Superintendent of Business Services, on the budget process. And again, she'll be looking for our input on priorities for students with special education needs. So welcome, Roxana.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for having me today. Are you able to see what I'm presenting right now? Wonderful. So we have two presentations for the committee during the budget process. The first one, which is earlier in the process, which is the one for this evening, will be focusing more in terms of an overview of the budget process, how we are funded as a school board, how special education allocation is funded in particular. And we will be taking a look at what this year looks like. So we don't have a lot of information in terms of next year's grants because they haven't been released yet, but we'll come back on, I believe it's June 1st, the meeting that you have for that month, with a draft budget with new initiatives and more details for your consideration and recommendation to go into our budget. So we'll do that in a two-step approach. Feel free to ask me questions as I go through the presentation. I understand there's some new members on the committee. I just wanted to make sure that while I'm not going to be covering all 50 slides that I'm presenting today, I wanted to leave you with some of the detail to take away and reflect back on if you wanted to do so. So I'll just go through the presentation, just walk you a little bit through the budget process. We have 3 main reporting cycles. The budget estimates, which is our current cycle, starts before the beginning of the year and is approved essentially 3 months before the year starts. It is approved by the Board of Trustees by the end of June, as required by regulation, and is based on projected enrollment. So we actually project both dates of enrollment, which is October 31st and March 31st, using trends and demographic data, development data, etc., in order to determine how many students we expect to have for which areas within our board. And that is the main driver of our revenue as well. Then 3 months after the beginning of the year, we have a revised budget estimates. That provides us with more information in terms of the actual enrollment for October 31st. So we now know what they are, what students we have in the seats, and we are then projecting the March 31st enrollment. So it's a much better financial snapshot as to where we expect to end for the year. The numbers that I'm going to present in this presentation are going to be from the revised estimates that was presented to the Board of Trustees on December the 16th, actually was the board meeting this year. It's for the current year financials. The audited financial statements are 3 months after the end of the year. They are audited by Deloitte and are approved by the Board of Trustees, usually mid-November. So with that, if we look at our budget process, it really starts back in December or January, depending on when the government is able to release the funding consultation guide and requesting input from the education partners, school boards, trustee associations, etc. This year, they were looking at some particular focus around the administrative areas, looking at the COVID post-pandemic implications as well. And it did not give us an indication that there will be a lot of changes in the grants for the coming year. We're also looking at this budget process to align the strategic priorities, the operational plan, the special education plan, as well as our corporate risk profile. What are the areas that are jeopardizing our ability to achieve our objectives? And we're trying to align all that with the financial resources, staffing, and just alignment overall throughout our system. We are also seeking feedback into the budget. We had a budget survey that was released in February, and we'll be presenting the results at the next board meeting. Well, actually tomorrow night. We're going to be discussing some of the themes that we've seen in that. We've aligned the feedback for the budget to our priorities as well, the strategic priorities. And I believe we received about 1,800 submissions this year. And of course, we have a lot of requirements to align with ministry regulations and enveloping, as well as any flexibility and reporting requirements. The next slide just outlines the key dates in the budget process from December all the way to June. As I mentioned, we are going to come back to this committee on June 1st to present the draft budget presentation. We expect that the grants will be released by mid-April, so we will spend the following few weeks in drafting the budget that will be presented to the Committee of the Whole, probably on May 26th. We're still confirming that date. It all depends on when the grants are made available. And the plan is to have the budget approved by the Board of Trustees on the June 16th board meeting. So the grants for student needs are our main source of funding. About 90% of our $803 or so million in revenue come from the grants for student needs. And the main driver is, I mentioned before, is enrollment. Other drivers include, for example, the demographic parameters, and that has a lot to do with the statistics and allocation for the special education, for example, and also the index for our facilities, the square footage, etc. So all of those factors are built into a complex formula that is called the Grants for Student Needs and has a number of allocations within it. The Pupil Foundation grant is essentially funding the teachers and the support staff that are in the classroom supporting our students, as well as classroom supplies. You will notice that I try to highlight the areas where there's support in the Grants for Student Needs for special educations outside of the actual allocation, because the grant is meant to support the programs for some of the other areas as well. So under the Pupil Foundation grant, there is a section for professionals and paraprofessional support. This includes, for example, speech and language pathologists, child and youth counselors, social workers, etc. And they are supporting the special education grant. The educational assistant portion in this particular area is quite small, and it's meant for any assistants that are outside of the special education program. The School Foundation grant is looking at the administration of the school. So it's the principal, the vice principal, support staff in the office, and supplies for the office for the school. And then we have the supplemental grants, which are specific, address specific needs for our system. Some of the supplemental grants we would not be qualifying for because of the nature of our demographic. Being more of an urban board, for example, we would not get a rural component or a northern component that some of our colleagues in the north may receive. But the ones that are worth mentioning under supplemental grants include the special education grant, which I will break down for you in a bit. The language grant for French and English as a second language, Indigenous education, learning opportunities grant also is used to support students at risk and various programs in terms of learning gaps. The mental health and well-being grant, there was additional funding that was provided through the Grants for Students this year that would reflect here. And again, some of the resources that are supporting the special education programs are funded through this allocation. Continuing education grant and some other areas here. Student transportation, for example, is, although it's not specifically identifying a portion for special education, it is meant to support all programs of the school board, including special education. And there's funding for transportation to provincial schools within this area as well. There are additional supports for student fund that have been included as part of the collective agreements. And you will see in the revenues as well as in the staffing that there have been some additional resources provided through these funds. This is a timed funding for the 3 years of the collective agreements. And the other one I wanted to mention here is through the School Board Administration and Governance Grant that provides funding for the Superintendent of Education and the superintendent's office. So those are outside of the special education grants. So the key components of the budget are the enrollment, which is, as I mentioned, the main driver. And then we're going to take a look at the revenues and expenses of the board, just the breakdown, and dive a little bit deeper into the special education revenues and expenses in particular. In terms of enrollment, the projections, as I mentioned, are based on a number of factors, including birth rates, migration rates, and demographic, as well as any transition or retention between the different publicly funded school boards. As a result of the current environment and the pandemic, we've realized that the migration rates have decreased, the development has decreased, and the growth that we were expecting has not materialized as they would have in the prior years. So if we look at our enrollment, you will note that I don't know if I can highlight here. So this particular one here that says original budget, you will note that it was projected last year that we will have 66,727 students in total. We actually only ended up with 65,732. So that's almost 1,000 students less than what we projected. And that was mainly as a result of significantly less enrollment in the kindergarten grades, the entry grades, increase in homeschooling, as well as a reduction in international students. And that was a direct impact of the pandemic. If we look at the projection for next year, we are projecting growth in the secondary panel of about 810 students. A lot of that is as a relation of a large grade 8 moving into the secondary panel, and a reduction in the elementary panel as a result of smaller entry grades in the kindergarten grades, as opposed to the grade 8 that is graduating and moving into the secondary panel. So overall, about 652 students is what we currently project to see as growth over the current year. And this is just showing the growth trend of the board for the last 10 years, and you'll see how it tapers off between 2019 and 2020 years, and then we expect some growth to be materialized again next year. In terms of the revenues, I've mentioned before that the grants for student needs represent approximately 90 or 91% of our revenues. Some of the other areas to mention are the provincial grants. Other provincial grants are called partnerships and priorities and partnership funds. These are pilot funding, including, for example, mental health funding, math strategy, for example, summer learning programs. They would be funded on a pilot basis, and they're not guaranteed to continue year after year, or the amount is not guaranteed. They are reflected here. There's additional federal grants, which we receive for the Welcome Center and classes, language classes for non-credit adult courses. School-generated funds represents about 1.5% of our revenue, and that is allocated for each school community that has generated the funds. And then we have other income revenue, mainly would include our land levies for education development charges, which help us purchase land for new schools in growth areas such as Milton, South Milton, and North Oakville. The next few slides just outline some of those areas in those categories. And then for expenses, we spend most of our funding on instruction, so 79%. is spent directly and indirectly in the classroom. Pupil accommodation, 14%, that really refers to the school operations and maintenance, groundkeeping. So that is also indirectly related to instruction, and transportation, student transportation as well as other refers mostly to the costs associated with the school generated funds and the co-curricular, extracurricular activities in our schools. So really, when we put it all together, administration is 2.2% of our budget. Everything else is directly or indirectly related to the instruction and the programs within our system. And the next few slides just outline a few details on each expense category. Looking at how the expenses are broken down, most of our expenses are salary and benefits, which is at 80%, and 20% is non-salary, which includes paying utilities, groundskeeping, repairs. Those are probably the most of them, technology and instructional supplies, as well as office supplies. So when we look at what we spend within schools and on instruction, it's about 93% of salaries. And the pupil accommodation is the maintenance, custodial staff, mostly that are all actually within our schools as well. The non-salary expenses, most of our non-salary costs are maintaining our schools, so pupil accommodation. Other expenses will refer to any portion of the school generated funds that may be included in there. Instruction is learning materials, instruction, licenses for learning resources as well, and transportation, another 12% there. Do let me know if I am going a bit too fast through this, or if you want me to pause on any of that, but that is, in summary, just an outlook at our revenue, the breakdown of our revenue categories and expense categories overall for the board. And the next few slides will focus on the special education grant and how we are funded. It has 6 main components, and I will go, there's a little bit of detail for each one of these components. The special education grant is what we call enveloped. It can only be spent on expenses that it was meant for, so expenses for special education resources and programs. And any unspent amount would be deferred into the next year to be used for the purposes it was intended for. Within this grant, there's a double enveloped amount, which is the special equipment amount, and that can only be spent on equipment that supports our students. And that is one of the areas where we do have a rollover of deferred revenue year over year, to some extent, if we don't spend the entire amount, because it's so very specific. So the special education per pupil amount is mainly based on the overall enrollment. So it's not specific to certain students with certain exceptionalities. It is the enrollment of the board that drives this, and it is meant to include the overall, to address the overall needs of our students, for the majority of our students with special needs. The differentiated special education needs amount allocation is mostly based on a statistical model that takes into account various statistical demographic area. There's some categories involved, and depending on where our board had been qualifying on and which categories, we would receive a portion of that revenue. And it also includes the, since 2018-2019, the multidisciplinary support amount for the teams and other staffing components. So that's a new component, as I mentioned, and it's expected to continue. And it is including supports for social workers, psychologists, behavior specialists, and speech-language pathologists, as well as other staffing to increase the capacity and support for students with exceptionalities. The special equipment amount that I mentioned before that can only be spent on purchases of non-computer based equipment. So it's equipment like sensory equipment, hearing equipment, vision support, etc. It has a base amount and then a claims amount that we put forward based on the needs for that year. The Education and Community Partnership Programs allocation was previously called the Care Treatment Custody and Correctional Amount, and it was for students in government-approved centers or hospitals, detention centers, etc., providing support for those students in other government agencies. And the funding looks at staffing, classroom supplies. It doesn't have any specific funding for transportation, so we would have to cover that from the overall transportation grant. The special incidents portion is another area within the special education grant that is designed to support our most exceptional students that may need 2 or more full-time staff to address their needs for the health and safety of the student and others at their school. Behavior expertise amount and the applied behavior analysis training is an allocation that doubled last year in 2019-2020 and provides support for the professional staff and training opportunities. It also allowed us to hire additional applied behavioral analyst professionals to support our multidisciplinary teams as well as our schools. So outside of the special education grant, the overall grant for student needs is meant to complement that through some of the allocations I've mentioned before, but I wanted to put them all into one area to see how we help support this program and the cost that exceeds the revenue or the funding within special education. So that is looking at some additional support throughout the pupil foundation allocation, transportation, the supports for student funds, which has been tied to collective agreement, and the overall administration and governance grant of the board. So if we look at the special education revenue, the next few slides just breaks it down a little bit to see how it's calculated for the 6 areas that I mentioned, the 6 components. So the special education per pupil amount, about 51.5 million. The special education equipment amount is 3 million a year. The allocation for the current year is 3 million. The differentiated special needs amount is 31.5 million. The special incidents portion for those students that may require 2 or more staff to support them is about 2.3 million. Students in care facilities, 3.3. The behavior expertise allocation, including the training, is 761,000. And then in addition to that, there's some other areas. The allocation for pupils in self-contained classes, about 8 million. Any deferred revenue from the prior year for the special equipment allocation, or what we call SIA, the 1.5 million. We have the support for student funding that was provided through collective agreement at around 4.2 million. And then other areas within the grant and reserves, as well as those partnerships, priority and partnership funding, one-time funding of about another 3.6 million. So all in all, we're looking at revenue to support special education of 109.7 million. So let's have a look at the expenses for the current year. And we're looking at comparing them to the actuals for the prior year as well. So we have around 49 million, 49.3 for classroom teachers and special education resource teachers. Educational assistants, the educational assistants about 48.7 million, other textbooks and supplies for about 4.8, professional and paraprofessionals, which are speech language pathologists, mental health, etc. About 13 million there. Some additional staff development and other centralized staff to support our schools for about 2.2 million. When we look at everything together, and we do have a breakdown of staffing in the next slides, we are looking at total revenues for special education this year at 127.6 million, which is up almost 12 million from the prior year. And you will recall I had mentioned we did not see growth year over year. We were pretty close. I think it was 95 students more year over year, which is not something that we've experienced in Halton in the last decade. However, there were some additional costs as well for the financials. In the prior year, there were some savings as a result of labor negotiations and strike action, as well as the shutdown that occurred in March of last year. So we were expecting it to be higher in the budget than we actually ended up. So it might not be the regular year expenses compared to the current year. But year over year, we are always investing more in the programs for our students with special needs. Some of the other costs that are not included in the 127 million that I've mentioned above are about 7.5 million for transportation and the administration office for the superintendent of education. So that's an additional 7.8 million cover for those allocations. So in terms of funding versus costs, if we put them all together, you will notice that expenditures are in excess of revenues. For last year, we ended up at approximately 15.3 million as a result of some of those savings I mentioned before. For the current year, we expect to be at 17.8 million excess costs over the funding for special education, including those additional areas within the grants for student needs. And I'm going to mention that we typically spend more than we are funded for on these programs, and we do so consciously as we're trying to address the needs of our students. So it is done on purpose, and we are able to allocate additional funding throughout other areas of the budget that would allow for some of this flexibility, including some of the supply lines, some additional lines within the pupil accommodation, and so forth. And in terms of staffing, We are looking at about 54 and a half more staff over the prior year, of which 22 are teachers, 15 additional educational assistants, 10 specialized behavior support workers are the main ones to mention. And these are mostly funded through the support for student funding that was attached to collective agreements, as well as the mental health amount that was doubled throughout the year and was included in the grants for student needs. So in terms of budget consideration for the year, we are the second largest component of the provincial budget, and at about 25.5 billion. It certainly has been a challenging year, and the government has provided an additional 1.6 billion in additional investments, both from provincial funding as well as with assistance from the federal government, in order to provide personal protective equipment as well as additional staffing for reducing class sizes in areas of need, and to allow us to run not 2 but 3 learning models. We have a hybrid at the secondary level, and then we have virtual schools as well as in-class learning. As I mentioned before, we were looking at the education funding consultation that ended in January, and focused on administrative burden and red tape, but also looking at the outbreak response and looking forward to the needs for next year. So we certainly did identify the learning gaps and some of the concerns for student well-being, and as being some of the areas we would like to see reflected in next year's grants for student needs. Overall, school boards in the province have witnessed a decrease in enrollment, just like our school board. So it is difficult to determine where we are going to see enrollment next year. The provincial budget was released at the end of March, looking at some of the highlights as it relates to the education sector. We don't expect any major changes year over year, and they are committed to release the grants for student needs by mid-April, so we can work on our draft budget for the May Committee of the Whole, and then for the June 1st meeting or presentation back to this committee. I think I cover most of these challenges. We are not currently clear if we're going to have one learning model or the virtual school may still be an option next year. We're waiting to hear back when more information is provided by the public health to the ministry. In the meantime, we are looking at having a sort of a two plans for next year, which is making it very difficult to budget and very difficult to actually plan on. And we are also focusing on ensuring that we continue to have technology. We continue to work for the ventilation, improvements for our facilities, as well as the protective equipment and sanitizer and all those supplies. From a board perspective, we are growing. We're completing additional schools, particularly in South Milton. Pupil accommodation are a challenge because we are not certain how many students will be in the bricks and mortar, how many students might be in a virtual environment, if that's going to be the case, how many will continue to be homeschooled, and how many little ones may not start in kindergarten next year, as they may be held back by families until they feel more safe to send the little ones to school, considering the pandemic or post-pandemic environment. And a few dates to leave with you before I stop and see if there's any questions. April 27th, we do have an update at the Committee of the Whole on the budget. We're hoping that the GSM will be released by then, and we can at least discuss that portion, as well as an initial list of some of the areas we're looking at in terms of new initiatives. The draft budget is planned for May 26th. We still need to confirm that date. And then we'll see you again on June 1st and have a budget draft for the trustees on June 2nd and approval on the 16th. And you've been very patient. Thank you very much for allowing me to go through my presentation.
Thank you very much, Roxana. I see there's a question from Joanna.
Yes, hi, thank you. Roxana, I have a question for you with respect to the increase funding. So each year, for the past several years that I can remember, we've had a shortfall in the special education funding, and as you noted, we would go above and beyond, and we would fund student needs, taking money from other areas in essence. And so, you know, the trustees and I have been advocating for this funding formula to be revisited. And I'm wondering, you've noted that there is a 12 million increase this year. I'm wondering if you can elaborate on what that increase is attributed to, and how does it reconcile with our student needs and the funding that we have available?
Yes, absolutely. In part, the additional increase in expense is, I'm not sure if you can still see my screen. In part, it is covered through an increase in revenue as well. So most of that increase is as a result of additional resources that were provided through support through student funds, which is part of the centrally negotiated terms for the collective agreements, where every employee group received an amount of money to prioritize for additional staffing for local needs, to meet local needs, and in part throughout all those different employee groups. It's not just teachers, it's EAs and PSSPs as well. An amount was provided for additional staffing. So that is there, as well as some additional increases in other areas, such as mental health, for example, would also be reflected here, and an overall increase in our grants year over year. So yes, in part, the additional expense increase is funded, and in part it increases our shortfall in special education. There was a working group a couple of years ago, I should say, that had restarted the discussion to update the special education funding. However, that has been put on pause for a while. There were discussions that is starting again, but I haven't heard any updates, and I don't expect there will be any changes in the formula for next year. We'll see. Maybe there will be some work from that working group provincially, and maybe something reflected in the year after that. At this point, I do have to say, when I looked at the provincial government, the provincial budget, and I looked at the education section within it, it jumps from about $1.3 million or $1.6 billion or $1.6 billion increase to this year to $300 or $400 million the next 2 years, as the province is trying to work towards balancing the budget provincially and covering for the COVID expenses up to about 2029. So I don't expect there will be additional funding as we emerge from the pandemic. If there is work and there's more alignment, I can see it being a bit more of a reallocation between school boards. We did lose quite a bit of funding when The formula changed. It was phased in through 2014 to 2018 or so. And for our board, I think we lost about $18 to $20 million throughout that reallocation. And it certainly is reflected in our excess, as you see here.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions for Roxana? James, is your hand up or is it still Yarlin?
Hi, Roxana. And I have, since you have the slide right in front of you, just a quick question. And what is the reason for the decreased amount for the self-contained adjustment? So right on this slide. So that's the only amount that is decreased, with all the others, have shown increase.
Yes, that is directly related to enrollment in self-contained classes. If that decreases year over year, maybe the students may be part of other regular classes, and then there's an increase in other areas of the special education allocation. But that certainly is directly linked to the number of students and the number of classes for self-contained classes in all of our programs across the system. So it will go up and down based on what is available and the need in those classes year after year. I do expect a lot of our enrollment drop overall also impact that area. 1,000 students lost year over year is probably where we see an impact, a direct impact through that enrollment here.
Okay, I also, because I'm new and to SEAC, and but from what I was briefed, and from the past representative from ABC, that I heard that there was a big decrease of the students, and especially in the primary gifted program, because of COVID or because of other factors. And would that be something that contribute to that?
Yes, primary gifted classes would also be part of this. However, what happens there, the students, as long as the students are within our system, the funding just follows the class, right? So the funding will follow within that pupil foundation grant. But this also includes all of our life skills and CPP classes, all of those programs. So it really is a reflective amount for all of our programs in self-contained.
Thank you.
Any other questions at this stage for Roxana? No? Well, thank you again, Roxana, for coming to speak to us. I imagine you've got a huge amount of work over the next few months as the figures finally come through from the ministry. We obviously all hope that the cuts won't be too drastic as we try and cope with coming out the other side of, hopefully the other side of this pandemic, and ensuring that our education system is still serving the needs of our exceptional students. So, so if there are no more questions, I'd like to thank you again for joining us. And yeah, that's great.
Thank you for having me.
Great, thank you. Okay, so after that presentation, again, lots to digest there. We're now at item 3.0 on our agenda, which is the SEAC discussion and question period. If anybody has any specific questions or topics that they'd like to raise, could you please indicate so in the chat box? Sarah? Oh, nope, she's left the meeting. Sarah, yes, you do have your hand up. Sarah, you there?
Oh, sorry. Yes, my finger slipped and I put my hand up, left the meeting, and then came back. Sorry about that.
Okay.
I was just wondering, and this is just a question, just being new to SEAC. I was wondering if at some point it would be an appropriate agenda item to go over the PAC on SEAC report or survey that came back. I think Lorna had sent it out. Thank you. In January. And I didn't know, I'd just been sort of going through it, and I didn't know if that was something that would be reviewed at a meeting or.
Yeah, we can certainly take it away and look at whether there's space for it in the agenda for the next couple of months, and see if we want to review that and review their recommendations on SEAC and its operations. So yeah, that would be a good topic to add to our agenda.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, like I said, I was just looking and I wasn't sure if it was. Okay,
no, that's
thank
great.
you.
And then somebody also at our last meeting raised a question about what was the process for joining committees. And I think that Lorna is reaching out to some of the trustees to find out what committees are looking for SEAC input. And then it will come back to SEAC for people to volunteer for specific committees. So they'll take place shortly. Any other questions for Colette at this stage, or general SEAC questions? No? Okay. So we're now at item 4.0, communications to SEAC, and we'll start with Colette. She's obviously provided us with a written report, and if Colette would like to go over a brief summary, and if there are any questions, she'll be available to answer them.
Thanks, Alison, and nice to have everyone here this evening. Today is World Autism Day, and April is World Autism Month. And on this particular day, we recognize autism awareness with the hope to build inclusion and appreciation for students and members in the community with autism. And so I'd like to take this opportunity to recognize the learning that our organization has done this week with regards to a post using puzzle pieces on Twitter to recognize this day. And it's come to our attention through a response to that post and in speaking with Lisa, our SEAC representative from Autism Ontario, that this symbol can be interpreted as people with autism are not whole, that they need to be put together to be complete, and that they are complex like a puzzle. And so I also learned that this image is no longer used on the Autism Ontario website, and so we will certainly be looking at updating our awareness campaign to ensure that it's inclusive and respectful to the autism community. And on top of that, to add insult to injury, we've had some technical difficulties with Lisa this evening, and she hasn't been able to enter the meeting. I know she's watching our live stream. So we definitely will have that fixed for next week, but we would have loved to have heard an update from Autism Ontario on this day and in this month in particular. So I apologize to Lisa for this issue that we're having this evening. It seems fitting that we are announcing today that we are running a structured learning class pilot. This is phase 2 of this pilot, and it's to support students with autism. This is the second phase with some adjustments based on some key learnings from the first phase that ran in 2018-19 and 2019-20. And so this year, starting next year, this program will be a 2-year pilot run at 3 different sites in the west at Alexander's, in the east at Heritage Glen, and at P.L. Robertson in Milton in the north. Each class will support 6 students, And the profile to access this class is to have a clinical diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, to have the ability to access the Ontario curriculum, requiring additional programming for social skills, social cognition and self-regulation, and must be able to speak in age-appropriate sentences in order to access this learning. And so I would look forward to, over the coming months as we implement this pilot, to provide you updates on the progress next year. For math de-streaming, the ministry announced earlier this year that starting in September 2021, that math would be de-streamed for students. It is the intention, as we understand it, that this will be expanded to other subjects in grade 9 in years to come, but this initial year is really just focusing on math. The board has formed a multidisciplinary team to implement this change across our system, and Special Education Services has a representative on that team and will be looking at how we support students with special education needs in a de-streamed math program. We're moving along with our plans for summer learning, and further to the plans that we shared last month, some additional funds for summer learning for students with special education needs, as well as some funds for transitions for students back into school next August have been announced. And we're planning to offer 3 blocks of 8-day sessions to provide learning opportunities in the areas of life skills, speech and language, communication, social skills, structured reading, effective functioning, and gifted enrichment. So in May, schools will share the registration process with families of students with IEPs who will benefit from these summer program offerings. School programs, of course, will also be offering some summer learning opportunities that our students with special education needs may also access. We have a number of changes to our self-contained class locations. With every spring, there's an analysis of where we need to open, close, or move a program. And while I won't run through the full list that is in the print report, I will hit on a couple of highlights. One specifically is a life skills class at Heritage Glen. We do try to look at pairing life skills classes together in a school. And so this will be the second life skills class at Heritage Glen, so that we can offer a more diverse range of programming to meet the students' needs across 2 different programs. In Acton, we are closing the life skills program, the intermediate grades. Mackenzie Smith Bennett is undergoing a reconfiguration, and it will be effective in September 2021, a K-6 school, and the 7s and 8s are moving to Acton District High School, and that will become a 7-12 school. And so with that change, we have closed the life skills program, and students in that program have been offered either an early entry into the CPP program at Georgetown District High School, a spot in the life skills program in Silver Creek, or if the family chooses for their child to remain in their home school with the support that's needed for that student. And the last highlight I'll touch on is primary gifted. We are moving to a 2-model site for primary gifted, a north site and a south site. So the students who are currently in the program in Burlington at Ryerson will be moving to the current site in Oakville, that's at Pilgrim Wood, in order to create a kind of a more critical number of students within the primary classes to maintain the viability of the program and to ensure it stays a robust program. And so that again will be effective in September. And the last piece is just a reminder that next month we will be voting on the special education plan. And I believe that's been linked into the report for you, and an updated version will come out before our next SEAC meeting in May. And I have had an opportunity to meet some of you in the meet and greets, and I've been gathering some feedback, which I will share all of it with you, but I do want to just touch on two pieces of feedback which you may have noticed today, and that is the prompt questions in the agenda. So one of the things that I've heard is an interest to get more conversation happening in our meeting around some of the presentation topics. And so by planting a few questions in advance, hopefully that gets you thinking about those questions as you're reading the support documents, and allows you to come into the meeting with some things that you may want to ask, or some things that you may want to share. And we're certainly not limited to those questions, but really it's just to spark the thinking. And then the second piece is around the timeliness of receiving materials. I certainly appreciate that receiving materials only a few days before SEAC, particularly when there's a weekend in there, isn't enough time to thoroughly review the materials. And knowing that all of you have day jobs and that this is volunteer work for you. And so we are going to endeavor to get the agenda and support materials out to you a week prior to SEAC. And so for our next meeting, you should be receiving your materials by the Tuesday before our meeting. So hopefully that helps in having more time to take a look at those items. And as I say, I'll share all of the feedback once I've had an opportunity to meet with all of you and gather all of it. But those are just two nuggets that I wanted to share this evening. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions, Colette? Well, I just have a quick one then, Colette, regarding the transition programming that you've got planned for our students. I mean, obviously, one of the major concerns, I think, as parents around the table, many of us are feeling is the mental health needs of our students as they transition back after being perhaps out of school for up to 18 months. So when will that transition programming take place, and can you give us some idea of what it might look like?
So the intention of these transition funds are to support our most complex students returning into our schools, much like we did this past August, where we were able to have staff come in earlier prior to the start of the school year, and we were able to pay them to come in on their vacation in order to meet with families and have students experience the learning space and meet with a classroom teacher and that kind of thing. So it's really, those transition funds are targeted for our most complex students who will have difficulties transitioning back into school after a long break, or for our students who have been in a virtual setting, and so a really extended period of time. On top of those transition funds, the ministry has provided a significant amount of money for mental health. So there will be some initiatives that are run throughout the summer to target what you're speaking to, Alison, around the mental health needs of our students. And I know that Superintendent Zonneveld is working with his team in the Student Wellbeing Department on what exactly those plans are. So I anticipate that there will be more to share on that.
So just to follow up on that, if a family member or was very concerned about the transition process for their student, is now a time to contact? When should they be contacting their school?
So we haven't rolled it out to schools just yet. So this was just announced last week, so we're just in the planning stages, and we'll be rolling things out to schools after we return from our spring break. So I would suggest that as schools start to plan their own transitions for students, that in May and June, parents can certainly connect with their school's CERT or classroom teacher to learn about what opportunities may exist for their own child.
Great, thank you. Does anybody have any other questions for Colette? No, not at this time. Okay, well, if that is the case, it's now time for association reports. If there's anybody who would like to present something to the group, could you please raise your hand or put something in the chat box, please? Nothing at this time? Okay. So it's time now for the trustees' report.
Okay, super. Hello, everyone. Heather and I will tag team, and I'll just get started. As we conveyed last time, the search for the next Halton District School Board Director is ongoing. And by this time, some of you will have participated in that consultation. And all of that information was wrapped up into a position profile, and the job ad has been created and the advertisement was released. Applications are being accepted to April 21st, 2021. So it's an interesting time to be looking for a new director, but hopes are high that we'll find an awesome one. Yeah, an awesome person out there. As you heard from Roxana, we're moving into the annual budget process, so I'm not going to talk much about that, except to say that if anybody's interested, the results of the budget consultation are found in this month's agenda package for the board, and I'll send to Lorna the link so people can take a look in there to see what the priorities were. I would say that some of the themes that emerged are for enhanced experiential learning, diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism work, mental health resources and resourcing, as you mentioned, Allison, and lastly, but not leastly, for special education supports and needs. So it'll be interesting to see how all of this plays out, because as Roxana pointed out, we're not likely to get more more money from the provincial government this time around, given everything that's going on. There are a couple of other items on the agenda for tomorrow night. Firstly, there's the AODA report, which came to SEAC last month. And then secondly, there's a report on the rollout of a program called We've Got You, period, to provide free menstrual products in student washrooms. So whoever the namer was for that, I thought it was a pretty awesome and thematic name. Let's see here. So everybody has likely heard that the minister has indicated that schools will be open this week and that the spring break will proceed. In a number of adjacent boards or Ontario boards, the medical officers of health, under their authority, have decided to close the schools and move to online learning. That's not where we're at in Halton at this moment in time, but I think everybody is watching and listening carefully. Last month, we talked about the student census that's ongoing, and many schools and students and families have participated to date. It will be wrapping up in the early spring, and it will be good to see the data coming from that. I just want to give another shout out to the Inspire Awards process. If there's somebody that has inspired you or gone above and beyond for your student, whether it be somebody formally or informally connected to the school system, consider nominating them for an Inspire Award. Information is posted on the board website. And then lastly, as Heather and I and Joanna and Margot consider our role here and how we can best support you. We've talked about helping or supporting, raising your voices by bringing SEAC motions to the board table if and when there are SEAC motions, how we can support the group in writing to organizations and people outside of the board. So for example, right now there is something circulating in the media about an enhanced push towards online and virtual learning. And I've read a number of concerns and have a number of concerns, particularly as they relate to supporting and accommodating students with special needs if things go in that direction. So if SEAC ever chooses to write to the minister, I think we'd be really happy to support those kinds of activities as well to amplify your voices.
Thank you, Tracy.
Heather, did I miss?
You did an excellent job and covered almost everything. The only thing I can think of is that we are working and pushing pretty hard on getting the new schools built in North Oakville and in South Milton, and having as much of a voice as we can for our special needs, kids with special needs. The new high school in Milton will have a great CPP program. And speaking of the new high school, we're working on naming that very, very soon. So stay tuned for that.
Okay, thank you very much for that presentation. And at this time, I'd like to go through a list of the standing committees and see if there are any updates from SEAC representatives. The Parent Involvement Committee. Nope. Okay. The Accessibility Coordinating Committee. Nope. And the Equity and Inclusive Education Advisory Steering Committee.
We have a meeting coming up in the next week or two, so I will report next time.
Okay, great. Thank you, Diane. Okay, so we're now at item number 5 in the agenda and the next agenda or order paper. Just to let everybody know, we currently have plans for a presentation from Autism Ontario coming up, and I know that Voice would like to present, and then we also have potential speaker with lived experience of an intellectual disability who's written a book. But as mentioned, we need to review the special education plan and have the budget on our coming agendas. Are there any additional items that the committee would like to add to future agendas at this point? Okay, seeing none, I would like to take this opportunity at 9:11 to adjourn our SEAC meeting. Thank you very much for attending, everybody, and for everybody's hard work, and we'll see everybody next month.
Thank you. Good night.
All right, take care then.
Thank you.
Bye.